It's a late night. The Fall of Hearts by Katatonia, this is a late night kind of album. This is the kind of album that you toss on at 2 or 3 in the morning, and you start to reflect about perhaps old memory. Start to think about all of those different thoughts that tend to invade at hours like this, or all of those secrets that perhaps you keep deep within your mind. The things that you don't share with the folks that you see each and every day. So perhaps you either wear a mask, or perhaps it's best off that you handle them on your own. You're extremely self-reflective during these hours, especially if these are hours that you're spending by yourself. But we need to talk about this album because, like that introduction, Katatonia is kind of a band that explores all elements of itself. It's a very self-reflective band anymore. They're a group that really doesn't fit just one mold. Are they rock? Are they metal? Are they even metal anymore? They're depressive, they have doom elements, they have elements of goth. There's a lot of different sides to this band. They're really becoming very one of its kind, and they follow a trend of groups that have decided to opt on a bit of a shift of personality, and this has been well documented for many years, so it's nothing new. So this is also Katatonia with the Fall of Hearts. This is their magnum opus. This is 13 tracks if you're including the deluxe edition bonus cut, and 72 minutes of music. This is their longest album, and you have to recall that they had a couple of discs that had 13-minute long tracks on it, and that was at the start of their career. Now this album here boasts a couple of 7-minute long cuts, so it's about half of what you saw before, but let's dive into this a little bit. Let's see what makes this so different. Takeover is the very first track that you get off of Katatonia's brand new release, and the one thing that you notice is that this is not a record that's going to maintain a static nature. It's not one that's going to perhaps stick to a certain melodic aesthetic and feel comfortable within that realm throughout the entirety of the cut. It's not 7 minutes that's attempting to accommodate all of the time with the same idea, is basically what I'm saying. It almost feels like they're willing to explore the personality of each cut a little bit more. And this is also one that has a little bit more of the harder edge side that Katatonia is able to feel, which is something that for the first cut and the first part of this disc is actually going to end up being rather surprising. The way in which this is able to sort of go up and down and sort of take you on your own personal roller coaster ride, or maybe you're a businessman, you'd rather me use the Dow Jones Industrial Average, daily averages as a fucking metaphor for that, is one that gives you a good feeling about the remainder of this disc. It's not going to be one that's going to stay by itself in one place. It's instead allowing for kinesis, and that gives Takeover a lot of prop. Plus, it also starts to open up the keynote idea that is within all recent Katatonia discs, the ability of the band to really affect your mood through its music. And it's able to do that. By the end of this cut, you're already starting to feel your mood shift a little bit. Going into the next 2 tracks, especially Old Heart Falls, which we didn't talk about, but has been released prior, that whole moodiness continues to further itself a little bit more. And I love the transition of Old Heart Falls into the very next track, which is Decima, and it's a very devastating sound whenever the transition hits. It's one that sort of almost leaks into the next track during the end point of the song with a bit of desperation or a little bit of disappointment carried within its tone, and then you get into Decima, and that sort of emanates and continues. It's almost as though there is a really dark cloud that is happening in the lives of those that are sort of living this track, that are living the words that are being spoke. And that's something that, once again, with that whole mood angle going on, affects you even further, takes you a little bit further. But then you go into Sanction, which is one that takes things up a little bit of a heavier notch, and now you're starting to recognize, at this point, some of the different albums that perhaps are coming to mind in reference to this group, or in reference to the Fall of Hearts. And the ones that come to mind is that it's a less experimental, less psychedelic Wild Honey, or, album from the earlier days of Tiamat, which is kind of ironic considering one of the 2 brand new members that Katatonia now boasts formerly had residence within that band. But what's interesting about it is the fact that even though it doesn't go to that further step, this is instead sort of a tempered down version of an album such as Wild Honey, but you do start to hear these wild little differences and wild different experiments that are handled, whether it be with the synths or something that sounds like it's more of a bongo as opposed to a standard drum. And overall, just the composition is one that is not, as we mentioned with the first cut, it's not static, it is a kinetic son of a gun, and it's willing to undulate. So it's not necessarily aiming for repetition or psychedelia, it's instead one that is trying to maintain its spacey sort of atmospheric doom and depression, and is able to do so very well in the same way. So basically considered two albums to be doing the same thing, only with different sides of the spectrum, with different goals in mind. By the time you get to Sarok, which is a 7-minute and 25-minute long, the longest cut on the disc, then something else comes to mind. These are the hard-edged riffs that Opeth fans have been clamoring for since the days before Watershed. These are the riffs that they want to hear on the albums, which has caused so much complaint on releases such as Heritage and Pale Communion. And the funny thing is that even with the riffs, Jonas's voice is not one that accommodates what they would expect from Mike. He instead uses that middle register of his in order to really push through these songs and still provide power despite not having to go into any sort of guttural growl. And it's something that causes the song to continue its trek on very well. But by this point, you're also starting to notice that whole emotional grip that the album had over you with its first 4 cuts is starting to be lost, and Last Song Before the Fade seems kind of apt, considering this is about the point where you think that it's lost you for good. But moving right into Shifts and going into The Night Subscriber, it's able to retake that emotional passion back from you and once again sort of, flush it a bit down the toilet. And I don't mean that to say it abandons it, it just really sinks you to some lows. These are some beautiful cuts, and they're not necessarily heartbreaking numbers, but it's instead ones that sort of take all of that perhaps elevation that you were getting from the middle portion of this disc and starts to remind you that this is a Katatonia album. You're not meant to leave with a smile on your face feeling like you just listened to a Mr. Happy disc. This is a band that's instead aiming to really explore the more desolate and depressive side of our existence, of our emotionality, and that's what these tracks do. Moving into Pale Flag and then finally into Passer, which Passer begins with a very hard-edged, rough and gruff introduction, but then once again is able to move forward and end this disc, at least for now, with just a passion and a power that is not registered based off of just heavy riff alone. This gent from Tiamat that came in to provide some guitar riffs is not one that was very big into the process of the writing, but his little subtle arrangements or his little subtle contributions on this disc are definitely something that helped boost it a little bit further. Wide Awake and Quietus is the bonus track that you get on the deluxe edition of this disc. There are other editions that have a couple of other cuts. This is the one that I happen to get, and the only way that I could describe this near 5-minute long song is what would happen if Katatonia went further down the line and tried to basically become Katatonia mode or Depeche-tonia. It's like Depeche mode. It's a very cool little tribute. I almost really hate to see this only be the only time that experiment comes to be. It's almost like unfurl in a way where you kind of hope that you get a little bit more. I would like to see Katatonia maybe explore this a little bit further, even though it's not all that different than what they're really doing. It just is a little bit more glossed with the 80s and sounds more like traditional rock as opposed to really teetering on that border of metal and rock. So where do we go from here? I mean, this is a massive release. Is it worth it all? Is it something that doesn't seem to fall flat in any places? Well, at times you can certainly see a similarity between cuts that this band is able to produce. It's not one that becomes so kinetic and so varied that it all of a sudden takes on a life of its own and every track feels like a brand new carnival ride. It's instead one that does stay within a certain tone of voice. But this is still an album that, for its ambition, is able to not only keep your attention with that long track or that long album length, but not to mention also keep you very emotionally invested. And even though I said that you feel like you're losing that a bit with last song before the fade, looking back and, subsequent listens of this disc really showcase that as being perhaps very calculated, kind of being what the band was aiming to do, to kind of get you into that false sense that everything was okay, only to hit you once again. I'll give this album a 91 out of 100. Is this Katatonia's magnum opus? A lot of people are going to say no, considering albums such as Brave Murder Day, Last Fair Deal Gone Down, Viva Emptiness even. There are other albums that exist by this group that they find to be really their crowning achievements. They're real ace in the hole. But this is definitely not one to sleep on. It's one that takes on a bit of a more progressive tone. It's one that is a little bit more expansive. It's not your granddaddy's Katatonia from 4 years ago that examines the world through 3 and 4 minute long cuts and a runtime of maybe 45 minutes. There's definitely 25 more for you to digest just for kicks. But it's an album that's also very steady. It stands very well on its own 2 feet, and it keeps you so emotionally involved that it's very difficult to tear away from it. If you're a smoker, this is a great way to quit, unless, of course, you smoke while you listen to it. But I don't know what you guys think about this album, but The Fall of Hearts by Katatonia. Let me know in the comments below. My name is coverkillernation, and if you like reviews, and like this one, then you're going to want to hit that little subscribe button down there, because we do this a lot, and I really like this aspect of it. If this is your first time that you've ever heard of Katatonia, let me know in the comments and give the video a like. Once again, I'm coverkillernation. I'll talk to you later. Peace.